Good evening, everyone. It's Necro Thursday. That means it's time for the Necromaniacs Horror Podcast. How's it going, Mike?
It is going well. Tonight you get Mike and Mike, a double Mike episode. January is winding down. It's been a bit of a mild winter here in the Northeast, Mike. Would you agree?
Definitely. I mean, we had some cold days, but there hasn't been any snow at all. You know?
Zero snow, which is weird for almost February in New York. Doesn't happen a lot. Who knows what February and March will bring? But I, people get mad at me when I say this, but I would like to see some snow. And they say, well, you say that because you don't have a car. But it doesn't matter. Car, no car. I still would like to see some snow this winter.
Remember that blizzard we had like a few years ago?
Mm-hmm.
That was brutal,
yeah.
Man.
That was brutal, yes. But it's appropriate, though. You're not supposed to have these days where every day feels like October and November in January,
No, I agree.
Yeah. But, things are good. I am caught up on my two episodes, which I rewatched because I enjoyed them so much, of The Last of Us, Mike Hill. Digging it?
Yeah. Well, today's Sunday when they're recording this, so I have to say that I'm really looking forward to watching episode 3.
Yeah, big time. Listeners, if you're not checking it out, you're doing yourself a disservice. If you think it's another zombie thing or whatever, or we've seen this before, I do not think you've seen this before, and it is excellent television horror. Calling it excellent television horror, I don't even think is even good enough. It's just excellent horror, period. No?
Yeah, and I didn't know much about the game. Like I've said before, I haven't really been playing games for at least 10 years.
Right.
And, it's when I first heard about it, I was like, a video game. But then I started seeing like trailers for it and like little teasers. And I was like, man, this actually looks pretty good. So
yeah,
it turned out to be really good.
Whereas episode 1, I felt was very creepy and, it had the excellent build up at the beginning and all that. I thought episode 2 was just genuinely like scary, especially at the latter end when a certain character doesn't make it out, which I won't say. I thought that entire scene in like the hotel and in the guts of Boston, because it takes place in Boston, was just fucking fantastic, man. And it keeps me on the edge of my seat, honestly. Like it really does. I mean, I don't know, not blowing smoke up the listeners' butts, but it is just super enjoyable thus far, Mike.
Yeah, no, I'm all in. I'm all in on this, man, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
In a way, I feel like this might have inspired us for doing tonight's episode.
Yes, it kind of sort of has, but we'll get into that momentarily. Before we go anywhere, if you're a new listener or an old listener, at the beginning of the show, we like to give the plugs of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And Mike, just a little bit about what the Horsemen of the Apocalypse are.
Well, over the last couple of years, there's this, a bunch of different people started doing podcasts, and we all sort of connected very organically, just over a common interest in really quality music, movies, and just being cool people too. So
and honestly, social media itself, plays a part in it. I mean, can't deny that.
No, totally. Yeah,
exactly.
And also, just I got to also mention that the pandemic probably is partly responsible for us, finding each other too.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. So, who do we have on Mondays, Mike Hill?
On Monday, we have Horror Wolf 666, which is, as you guessed by the name, another horror podcast brought to you by Brandon Legion. And his show is focused on interviews with luminaries within the horror industry. And they're filmmakers, actors. Sometimes me and you show up on there. We talk about horror movies. You know,
I believe my episode is this week. It might even be out there by the time you're hearing it, dear listeners. So please check that episode out at the very least. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, on Mondays, we've got Horror Wolf 666. On Tuesdays, we have none other than my personal favorite metal music podcast, Into the Necrosphere. Right, Michael?
Back after a little bit of a vacation. And so back. And by the time you hear this, you probably will have heard the wrap up of the Into the Necrosphere Best of 2023. And
correct. 2022. Yes.
So I'm sorry. Yeah. 2022. We're in 2023 right now. So yeah. And that should be your guide to incredible metal records, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, do I like everything on his list? No. Have I heard of everything on his list? No. But a bunch of it I certainly have heard of, and I certainly enjoyed the hell out of in 2022. So, very solid stuff. Coming to you on Wednesday, of course, none other than Mike Hill's own Everything Went Black podcast, which is a bit of a smorgasbord of different things. It can be about music. It can be about issues of the day. It could be about anything, right, Michael?
Pretty much, and that was the... I've been doing that for a long time, and it was just kind of this attempt at doing a podcast, and then, just sort of a learning experience, and it's been a lot of fun. And, there's a really good group of people on there who've been following it for a number of years, and, we all stay in touch. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, good stuff. On Thursday, while you're listening to it right now, the Necromaniacs podcast coming to you every single Thursday, with Mike Hill, myself, Mike Scandato, and Jeff Kashid. So please continue your listenership on Thursdays. Coming to you currently on Sunday, Mike, is Break the Apocalypse. However, I was informed with today's episode that they are going back to Fridays. Mike, how about that?
I like it better on Friday, actually.
Yes, I do as well. So I am glad they're going back to the Friday format. That's my brother, John Draper. It's a really cool podcast if you're into comedy and, issues of the day, different stuff. They talk about horror, too, on that podcast. They talk about music. They talk about a bunch of different stuff. So check that out, Break the Apocalypse. And we have one more podcast to plug, right, Michael?
Yeah, we got Soul Knox on Sunday, which is hosted by Carl Hikara. And he has a bit of a pretty wide bandwidth of stuff that he talks about. A lot of it has to do with the occult and, esoteric stuff like that. He has guests. I actually have been on. We have this I'm like a semi-regular guest.
Yes, you are.
And Carl and I get together and we talk about weird fiction and sword and sorcery and like Robert E. Howard stories and things like that. So maybe once a month I'll be on there, and it's been a lot of fun. Carl's an interesting guy. Definitely check it out.
He is indeed. And those are your horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse. All of your needs. Make sure you check everybody out. If you're listening to any of these podcasts on Apple, leave a nice review. Hit that 5-star, 4-star, whatever star review that's there. Hook everybody up. Mike, you do anything over this past weekend?
Well, I didn't really do much. I had a lot of technical stuff that I had to deal with. I'm going to be recording a side project next weekend up in Boston. It's a as yet unnamed side project.
I'm not even aware of this.
Yeah, I've been working on it for like the last couple months, and it features me and one of my old drummers, Brian Strawn. And we played together way back. in a band called Otis, which most people don't even know about.
Yes, I remember that name. Yes.
And Brian has been very busy in a weird way over the last couple of decades, just doing session work and playing on other people's records and things like that. And we ran into each other last year when we played in Providence, and he came out to the show, and we just were like back in touch again. And we had a bunch of stuff we were talking about doing. So next weekend we're gonna, go in the studio and record 4 songs. And I was working on, prep this week. Working on, Tombs is working on some new material for record, and we got about 5 songs. So just working on demos, just doing that kind of thing.
That's great. Yeah, Tombs is always a step ahead, Mike Hill. I've always said that about you guys. Always a step ahead. You know?
Yeah, we had it seems like every excellent thing as far as touring has been postponed for us right now. So we had a really cool tour that we were about to announce in for June, but that had to get postponed. And there was a great tour last year that got postponed till this fall. And but you and I talked online about it. There's some cool stuff that we have in the works for June as far as the live front goes. But right now we're just like writing new material.
Yeah, man. Pick up the pieces and keep it moving. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll have a nice little announcement March 7th, Mike Hill, that I can't really talk about just yet. I've kind of sort of talked about it in other places already, but I'm just kind of keeping it under wraps. So keep the eyes peeled on the socials for a little March 7th announcement. But anyway, last night, Stella and I went to St. Vitus to see a hardcore show. We saw 2 of the Hudson Valley's finest, Age of Apocalypse and Mind Force. Mind Force are just kind of like on fire. They're this band. They've had put out their second LP last fall. They sold out 2 shows at Vitus in the same day, like immediately, Mike, which is no small feat.
Yeah, no, that's sick, man. I don't know who this band is, but that's a very very cool thing,
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been involved in the hardcore scene now 35 years. And for a long time, it took me a while to enjoy new hardcore. Like, I just wasn't into a lot of new hardcore because I just didn't think the bands were very good to my ears. But in the last 2 years in particular, a lot of new hardcore has been clicking with me, and this band is one of them. They definitely are in the vein of the first 2 Leeway LPs. Definitely some Beyond, the New York Beyond that was around in the late 80s. Maybe a little bit of Inside Out, the California, Zach De La Rocha Inside Out. Just really good metallic hardcore done well by the guys in Mind Force. Age of Apocalypse are a little younger band than those guys, and honestly they sound a lot like early Only Living Witness meets the first Life of Agony record. That's kind of what they sound like. Yeah.
I like that.
The singer sings. There's no screaming. He sings, and he sings in an interesting register. Literally, some of it sounds like Candlemass at times. So but to like metal hardcore music. So it's kind of, to me, it's got the originality factor going for them. That's Age of Apocalypse. I've seen them 3 times already, so I'm a fan. Cool show. So that's what I did over the weekend.
That's awesome. I haven't been to, well, that's not true. I was going to say I haven't been to Vitus in a minute, but the last time I was there, I saw you guys and at that Seventh Void, Silver Tomb.
Yeah,
Silver
Tomb
show. Yeah,
that was a good time.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this coming weekend, I guess the weekend by the time this goes out there, All Out War and Morpheus Descends and Disassociate are playing next Sunday evening, so I'll definitely be trotting out there to that, so that should be fun.
There's a chance I might make it in for that too, actually.
Yes. We'll do a Sunday night hang. We'll do a Saturday on Sunday. All right. That's what I like to call it.
Yeah.
But listeners, tonight we're going back to the 80s. We're going back to the mid 80s, 1985 in particular. And we will be discussing the George Romero classic, Day of the Dead. Right, Mike?
That's correct. And yeah, I feel like the very beginning of the first episode of The Last of Us has a very Romero-esque kind of vibe. And I think that put this in our minds, I think, to do this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mean that in the best way. See, that's the thing. I feel like if there's anybody that's maybe even a little reluctant for the Last of Us, because it's like, oh, I've seen The Walking Dead and I've seen the Romeros. Honestly, I almost feel like it's night and day, the influences are there, from the Romero stuff, but it's a different animal. But I think over the course of the years that we've done this podcast, we've never discussed this particular film, although it's been referenced, right? And it's been, talked about in passing. But Mike and I are both really big fans of Day of the Dead. So that's kind of how we landed on that for tonight, right?
Well, the funny thing too, Mike, is that I was convinced I had this on Blu-ray, right? Because this is one of my top movies, actually, out of all the the Romero Dead films. So I went through my collection, and sure enough, I don't have it on Blu-ray.
That sucks.
So I have to reconcile that, because it's the Blu-ray that Scream Factory did. It's got a lot of cool stuff on it.
Yeah, that's the one I have. Scream Factory. I mean, it's still available, listeners. Thank God it's not one of those I have to pay $85 for it on eBay discs. This movie should be highly available, and thank God it is. Thankfully, most of Romero's catalog is available. Honestly, I think every single one of his films should be available, but some are not. So yeah, you should have no problem scoping out Day of the Dead, although I do feel like I will throw a number out there. 85 to 90% of the listeners have seen this movie. What do you think?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I would say most people have seen it.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So spoilers ahead, folks. We're not treating this like a 2023 release. We'll be talking openly about the Day of the Dead, right, Mike?
Yeah. There's no reason to. Everyone's probably seen this movie.
Exactly. I think my 85-90 is even low. But yeah, man, this movie came out in the summer of 1985. Its first showing, oddly enough, was on June 30th, 1985, at a theater in Hicksville, Long Island, New York. Mike, how about that? And then it got wide release July 19th, 1985, for the rest of the country. The budget was somewhere between $3.5 million and $4 million, and it did gross $34 million, which was nothing to sneeze at. But I did learn in my research, compared to Night of the Living Dead and Dawn, this movie was a bit of a financial disappointment, which is interesting, huh?
Yes. I think I have some thoughts as to why, maybe.
Okay.
I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that. In a way, this movie is the end of an era in a couple of ways, but yeah, we will get into that. Do a little bit about the cast, of course, as we do on the show.
Before we do that, why do you think they debuted it in Hicksville, of all places?
When we go through movies from like the 70s and 80s, and then when we find the place where it premiered, if it's not like Manhattan or a major city, I literally have no idea why it's in the places it's in, Mike. Like, I don't know. Like,
yeah. Have you ever been to Hicksville?
Probably a reason.
you ever been to Hicksville, Long Island?
I have. I've played there with a human, probably. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's not much. It's just kind of like this random suburban town, man.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know I've played there. with Inhuman, and maybe even The Last Stand. So yeah, exactly. Random. But props to you, Long Island. One of the many cool factoids about Long Island. Let's be honest. Um, but yeah, this stars Laurie Cardille as Dr. Sarah Bowman. Little aside about Laurie Cardille, she is the daughter. Well, her dad is Bill Cardille, who was in Night of the Living Dead. He was one of Romero's buddies.
Oh yeah,
pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Bill Cardille is the TV, not the TV news anchor. He's like he's one of the guys who kind of he works for the TV network, and he's on camera. I think maybe it's towards the end of the movie. I can't really think right now, but yeah, he's a part of that Pittsburgh crew of Romero's. So this is his daughter Laurie. Joe Pilato as Captain Henry Rhodes. Terry Alexander as John Flyboy, the group's helicopter pilot. Side note, there was a Flyboy in Dawn of the Dead, right, Mike?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. They kept that going with the third installment, which I thought was cool. Jarlath Conroy as Bill McDermott. Richard Liberty as Dr. Matthew Frankenstein Logan, the mad scientist. Anthony DeLeo as Private Miguel Salazar. Sherman Howard as Bub. Interesting factoid. He's Howard Sherman in the movie. However, when you look him up now, he is Sherman Howard. Like all of his credits and everything, and he has a Wikipedia. He went on to do a ton of other shit. He's credited in the movie as Howard Sherman, but I believe his name is Sherman Howard. Anyway, Gary Howard Killar as Private Steele, one of my favorite characters in the movie, and Ralph Marrero as one of Rhodes' men, Private Rickles, and very important, Greg Nicotero as Private Johnson, and Tasso Stervakis as Private Juan Torres. Both Tasso and Nicotero went on to quite a bit of special effects fame, Mike. Huh?
Well, yeah, Nicotero, probably most notably, Walking Dead, The Mist, involved in all that stuff.
But Tasso is a stunt guy. He's in Dawn of the Dead, he's in Night Riders and Day of the Dead. And I always remembered his name associated with Savini. He worked with Savini a lot in other films as well. But these are their meager beginnings. So it's pretty cool to see them in this movie. As I mentioned before, it's a little bit of the end of an era. This is kind of the last movie for Romero where he has this kind of whole Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh crew thing happening, Mike.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because after this, it kind of became, after this, Land of the Dead, it was like a major
right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a whole other ball game, and like the other movies he would go on to do, he kind of didn't really work with a lot of his, I don't think he worked with his crew of old, connected to the Night of the Living Dead people as much anymore, is what I'm getting at.
Right.
This movie shot largely two states, Pennsylvania and Florida. It's funny, I couldn't remember if they indeed shot in Florida because the movie takes place in Florida. But yes, all the outside shots are in fact Florida, which is great. But all that interior stuff, like the mine and the whole kind of like silo and all that, that's in PA.
I could see that because cheaper, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. They shot that in Wampum, Pennsylvania, and in Florida it was Fort Myers and in Sanibel. So yeah. Cool thing about this movie is that if you watch Night of the Living Dead and then Dawn of the Dead and then this, you see the realization of the makeup, right? Like you see, look, Dawn is my favorite, but the makeup is not, it's not what it could have been. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like some of the faces and like, it's not 100%. Like, I almost feel like, although again, it is a personal favorite, I feel like by the time George gets to Day of the Dead, I think the zombies have that look to them. You know what I'm saying? While again, look, it's 1985 practical makeup, which it could progress more, but I do think this is where I feel like in his own head he might have been really satisfied, because I do know that this is his favorite zombie movie of his zombie movies, Mike.
Really? It's
Yes. Yeah.
this one rates really high with me too, and
Hmm.
now once again, that's why I'm surprised I never. I mean, now I mean I ordered it now, but the I'm surprised I didn't have this in my collection actually.
Mm. A little summation. It is a post-apocalyptic horror zombie film, of course, written and directed by George Romero, produced by Richard Rubenstein. It is, as I said, the third installment in the Night of the Living Dead series. Um, yeah, it largely takes place in an underground bunker in Florida, with some scientists and doctors and the military, where they determine the outcome of humanity's conflict with the undead horde. Romero himself described it as a tragedy about how a lack of human communication causes collapse and chaos even in this small slice of society. So I feel like with Night of the Living Dead, right? It's about racism, honestly. A lot of it is about racism. Okay, Dawn of the Dead, to me, if you put a word to it, it's about consumerism. Okay, mass consumerism. This movie, it's funny how in some of the research I did and the documentary I watched, they kept kind of going back to the lack of human communication and the mistrust of government. Okay, but I also feel like this movie is a child of the year it came out in. It's 1985. It's Reagan America. I feel like there is a nuclear cloud over this movie, no pun intended. And I feel like there is just a sense of that mid 80s nihilism in this movie. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. And it just, I feel like this, in a way, was the scariest out of the trilogy,
Yeah.
the first trilogy. Like we were saying before we started how for 1985, this was an extreme movie, I thought.
Mm,
You know?
yes. It's hard to really hammer that in now, because if you're seeing it now in 2023 eyes, yes, there are some fucking gross over the top scenes, but again, makeup has moved, progressed, and special effects have progressed. But if you saw this then, or even if you saw this 3 years later, it was the creme de la creme of practical effects in a way, for a zombie film. And it's very bloody, and there's a lot of death, and there's a lot of violence, a lot of killing. So yeah, this was considered extreme horror. I remember looking at my friends and brothers Fangorias when this came out, and it was like, holy shit,
Yeah,
it was a
definitely.
big deal. It was a big deal.
And once again, I can't confirm if I saw this in the movie theater or on VHS. I'm trying to remember. I cannot remember.
Well, I'll say this, okay? It's funny. Before we got the ball rolling, I told Mike that I had a story I would share. Now, over the years, I've said on the show many times that before I became a fan of horror as a young man, I was afraid of horror movies, okay? And this came out, I remember it very well, in the summer of 1985. I was 12, and I had just turned 12. And I was staying at my aunt's house. And you ever have a cousin who's not really your cousin, but he's
Yes.
related, but he or she is related to, say, the other side of the family,
Oh yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
like the non-blood, right?
Yeah.
Okay. My aunt was my blood side. The uncle was the non-blood side. This cousin was on the uncle side. So I was hanging out with one of my cousins and his friends in Gravesend, Brooklyn. And they're like, let's go.
I used to live in Gravesend, Brooklyn.
Yes, so did I. Exactly. And they were like, let's go to the movies. This was I believe, a Saturday afternoon in the summertime. Like, okay, yeah, And they all were like, let's go see Day of the Dead. Let's go see Day of the Dead. And it is decided that we're going to see Day of the Dead. Guess who didn't go with them to go see Day of the Dead?
You didn't go.
I didn't go. Do you know why I didn't go? Because I was a fucking horrified by the thought of having to see this movie in the theater at age 12. I had just kind of dipped my toes in horror movies on TV around this time, okay? I was no longer kind of afraid of maybe certain horror movies, or at least the TV versions of horror movies. But I knew this was a zombie movie. I saw the ad, you know, in the newspaper, which was probably the Post of the Daily News. I knew it was rated R. I knew we would have to sneak in, which was fine, you know. I had been sneaking in at that point to R-rated sex comedies. I mean, it wouldn't be a big deal to sneak into an R-rated movie at age 12. But Mike, I believe I thought of every reason in the book, even though, like I said, I was sleeping at my aunt's house. I was hanging out with my cousin literally that whole time. And I almost think he knew in my face that I didn't want to go, like why I didn't want to go. And again, we're a bunch of 12-year-olds, you know? And ultimately it was like, okay, Mike, we'll see you later when we get back or something. So I didn't go.
Yeah, but you know, at that age, honest, and also 1985, like I'm gonna make another musical analogy. Yeah, there were slasher movies, you know what I mean? But this is like Night of the Living Dead, or in this case, Day of the Dead. It's like going from like Iron Maiden to Slayer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's almost like going from Iron Maiden to 85 Bathory, which if you were doing that, you were some underground motherfucker. But what is funny, it's funny that you said Slayer. Guess who was already listening to Slayer?
You.
Me.
At the time.
But I was just, I don't know, man. I just had this something in my brain about seeing that kind of violence or horror that changed maybe months later, because I do remember by Christmas of 85, watching with all my buddies Silent Night, Deadly Night on VHS that Christmas and enjoying it, you know? But maybe it was just a little too soon.
Yeah.
Wow. It sucks because you know what? You know, that would have been my first like horror movie in a theater. So, so I have a story. It's just it's not the story I want it to be, but at least I have a Day of the Dead story.
Well, you know my origin story with horror films. So, it was already like, you know, it was too late for me to go back. You know what I mean? So,
but I guess 12 now is like young, you know, with the way children are raised, I feel like these days to a degree. Although horror movies to a 12-year-old now are probably a walk in the park. They were not a walk in the park in the 80s, listeners. Horror movies were, you weren't cool for being a horror head. You know what I'm saying? As a young man in the 80s, right, Mike?
Yeah, people thought that you were some kind of weird degenerate or something if you were into it, for sure.
Right, exactly. So no Day of the Dead for me at the movie theater. But I believe I saw it maybe 2 years later, probably sometime in 87 on VHS, and, you know, in the comfort of my home. So, yeah, as Mike was saying, pretty extreme stuff. Now, like, you were saying you rate this pretty high among the three films. And the movie initially didn't do what they wanted it to do. And you were saying you have a bit more to say on that.
Yeah, I think that the movie, I was commenting on how extreme it was. I think that a lot of people might have found this movie kind of distasteful in a lot of ways, if you think about it. In 1985, you know, we're seeing the military in a negative light, really, in this film.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Basically, everyone in this movie is out of control. Even the doctor. the scientist.
Yes.
He's a mad scientist. He's experimenting on people. You don't even know if he even knows what the hell he's doing, you know? And
You're 100% right. It's really ahead of its time with its distrust, okay?
Yeah.
Which Romero talks about in the documentary Extra. I mean, goddamn, what a smart, awesome fucking guy Romero was. God rest his soul. He really had something to say in every fucking thing he did, and he has something to say here. Not only do you dislike the military and not trust the military in this movie, you dislike and distrust science in this movie, right?
Yeah, everything's upside down, and the military are demonstrating very, very good, very well demonstrating a term that would come into our consciousness decades later called toxic masculinity.
Oh yeah, I mean, to say the least. Joe Pilato, who plays Henry Rhodes, the Captain Henry Rhodes. I mean, he's really over the top in this movie. He's a total unlikable, miserable scumbag military leader. Reading some reviews, they're saying there's a lot of overacting in this movie. Look, maybe it is a bit of overacting, scenery chewing in this film, but I feel like he really hammers the point home, and so does Steele. He's another total scumbag military guy, played by Gary Howard Kollar. There's a lot of unlikable scumbag men in this film, Mike, right?
Yeah, and also the intentional addition of the sole female character in this movie with Dr. Sarah Bowman. Now,
yeah,
you remember on this viewing, I started thinking about 28 Days Later, how the military, the guy who looks like Ralph Fiennes that that actually plays the British military guy.
Yes.
He's commenting about how one of his men killed himself because there was no women around, and that's like the whole thing. He's promising like his men women, and it's like at the end of the world, all male and one female must have been driving these guys fucking insane. And the fact that that Bowman, the guy that she was with was like such just a fucking mess too, man. That it was. You were moments away from a complete rebellion at all times in this movie, it felt like.
What did not dawn on me at all is that the other doctor, Dr. Ted Fisher, the technician guy, the mild-mannered guy, is played by actor John Amplas. John Amplas is Martin from George Romero's Martin. Didn't dawn on me unrecognizable. Yeah. Unrecognizable in this movie. Like he has a look, that guy Martin, but that look, like he has like a mustache, like he looks really different in this movie to me, like completely unrecognizable. But again, a part of that crew, about part of that Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh crew of friends and people that Romero worked with, that to me was just, I don't know, something really, really special about that, right?
Yeah.
A bond that he built in the 60s that lasted into the 80s, mid 80s, which is just so fucking cool. But yeah, the only likable men in this movie are Flyboy John, played by Terry Alexander, the helicopter pilot, and the alcoholic radio operator, Bill McDermott, played by Joel F. Conroy.
And Bowman, Dr. Bowman too.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. Yes. But the thing is, I feel like, again, I think Romero wanted to hammer this point home about authority, and I think it was a product of its time, 1985. Like, we were under threat in a way of nuclear annihilation, right? This is, a year or so after The Day After has come out, and our Russian relations are not 100% great. They're actually far worse than they, now they're much worse. But back then it was like, people thought about nuclear war a lot in 1985,
Sure.
And the military thing, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's kind of out of my head right now where we were militarily in 1985. I'm sure we were in some kind of conflict, right?
Well, there was a lot of nationalism in the 80s,
Yes. Oh yeah,
across
yeah.
across the board. You know what I mean? There was
Hmm.
like like a lot of like nationalism. So this movie, in a lot of ways, reminded me of Apocalypse Now. You know how like the
Hmm.
military is like, we default and we think about the military as being this like completely organized, very deliberate sort of operation. But in Apocalypse Now, you see how just out of control and insane everything was. And, people we know, you and I both know people who served in the 90s,
Hmm.
and,
Yeah.
and after that too. And the stories they have about how fucking war is chaos, really.
Yeah, this is making me realize something. So, for the younger listeners, the older listeners will recall this. There was a huge military war movie boom between 80 and 85, 86, um, which was a combination of a bunch of Vietnam movies. And honestly, the success of First Blood with Sylvester Stallone and Rambo. And this movie has a little bit of that runoff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
but he fucks with it though, because it's like
yes, he does.
the
He
military
does.
guys are one of the villains actually in this.
Yes, there's nothing cool. There's nothing cool about these guys. You don't like them.
Yeah,
Um,
they're very rapey. They're
mhm.
very like on the verge of just completely rebelling. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then again, you have they call him Dr. Frankenstein, Dr.
Yep.
Logan, who's
Yeah.
hacking away at these bodies, and we find out that he's actually feeding the dead soldiers to the zombie bub, and he's
Yes.
using some of the guys who were killed as like subjects, and
Mm.
it's just super dark.
Yeah, it is really dark. It is darker than Dawn of the Dead. It is in some ways darker than Night of the Living Dead, although I feel like Night of the Living Dead is actually quite dark for 1968.
Sure, absolutely.
Um, but this one is, I think it is the bleakest. And I feel like it has so much to say that goes over your head and definitely went over motherfuckers' heads in 1985, Mike, right?
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of these ideas are forming just last night when I rewatched it, when I was checking this out. I was like, yeah, man, this actually, some of this reminds me of Apocalypse Now in a weird way. You know,
Yeah, so okay, Dawn of the Dead was a big success and it came out in 1978 and they wanted a sequel. And apparently part of the deal he made when he made Dawn was that there would be a sequel. However, he did a few things leading up to Day of the Dead that he wanted to do. In 1981, Romero does Night Riders, which is not a huge success, and he does the excellent Creep Show in 1982, which again does better than Night Riders, but was not initially a huge success. That actually became a far bigger film on home video and became a far more widely regarded film later on down the line, which brings him to the fall of 1984 when he finally films, this third installment. Uh, what some may know or not know is that initially this film, Day of the Dead, was going to be what Romero wanted as the, Gone with the Wind of zombie films. He wanted a $7 million budget, actually. And this was going to have a bunch of swamp scenes and sprawling, like epic fight scenes that are outside of the military silo, and a bunch more outdoor stuff and a bunch more Florida shot stuff. That did not come to pass. The budget was cut in half, and the movie was agreed upon for about the $3.54 million instead of $7 million. Apparently, again, the initial film was going to be almost like a Raiders of the Lost Ark of zombies, Mike. How about that?
you know something that's cool, but I like it better the way it turned out.
Me too.
Yeah,
Honestly, I really do too. There's two, physical places in this film. There's the beginning outside in the sunshine, and it ends in the sunshine briefly. But you know, most of the film, the majority of the film is in a dark, depressing bunker, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. It's like the sunshine and the light is like where death is. That's where death lurks. Like if
Yeah.
you're topside, you're finished. You're not safe.
Mm.
The only safety is in this depressing subterranean fucking pit that these people live in. And I don't know why this particularly just depressed me, but there's that room that they have their meetings in.
Yeah, yeah.
And the folding chairs and this fucking like just totally this room that just looks boring and dull.
Yeah.
But that's where you have to live. You're safe down there with no sunlight, no windows.
There's no windows. No, there's no windows. There's no sunlight.
You're in darkness all the time.
It's darkness. It's white, slabs of brick or concrete, and kind of like, doctor's office lighting. And it is a bleak, claustrophobic film. And yeah, it just works. Like, and again, I could see why it didn't do great then. It's kind of like The Thing, The Thing was that small cast. There's no women in the film. There are things that are just simply not in The Thing. Okay, John Carpenter's The Thing, that made the critics of the day and the public at large not enjoy it. But years later, reevaluation, this is one of the greatest horror films ever made. I don't think Day of the Dead may be one of the greatest horror films ever made. It is definitely one of the greatest zombie films, and it is one of Romero's shining examples of a great horror film. And I could see why he enjoyed it a lot. You notice something else about this movie. George Romero was a progressive guy, decades ahead of the curve. The hero of this film, once again, is a black man. You notice that, right?
Yeah. Flyboy. Yep.
But the thing is, the other thing of note is that there are, a woman is the focal point of the film, which did not happen a lot in 1980s, in 85 in particular. And there are other minorities in this film. There's Latinos in this film. It's like, again, man, you George Romero, you really need to fucking give this man his credit. And I think he is actually finally getting his credit, but he was always ahead of his peers. Mike, do you think so?
I thought so. I've always felt that way. I mean, I've always held George Romero in like the highest regard, man. I thought he was like one of the maestros of just this whole genre, really.
Yeah, he's smart. And I feel like you don't think of, or people may not think of him as being as smart as he was, and he kind of hid things in his scripts and hid things in his storylines that I don't know if Craven always did or Carpenter always did. I don't know. I'm not slighting Craven or Carpenter. I love both of them, but I think Romero was almost like this classic liberal 60s guy who made horror films.
And he always, even in Night of the Living Dead, there was like this kind of anti-authoritarian, like anti-conservative like vibe to the films, which I mean, for me, I appreciate that because I'm not a conservative at all, but I do remember being like seeing this as a young kid, either in the theater or on VHS. I can't remember if I saw it in the movies or I saw it on VHS. But like when the army shows up, when you see the military guys, like you're thinking about Rambo, they're heroes.
Yes, it's that era. Yes,
I'm like these guys are like fucking evil, man. You know what I mean? They're like,
yeah.
I'm like, these guys aren't good guys.
No, they're like very guys.
Yeah,
they're terrible people.
Yeah, they're terrible people.
Terrible people in an era where the military was beloved, actually, in film. Film, okay,
right. Yeah.
In film, and it was cool to like American, like military Rambo gun-toting people was a very cool thing in the 80s. If you're of a certain age, you definitely recall this. Day of the Dead shoves that, down the toilet, so to speak, and the hero is a woman, a British alcoholic guy, and a black man. Those are the three heroes of this film.
Yeah, totally. I love it. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you know
and
what else I love? Bub. Bub to me, honestly, is almost like the zombie Bub played by Sherman Howard. I guess I'll call him Sherman Howard instead of
sure.
Howard Sherman. Um, he is the first like zombie character almost in horror film history. No?
Yeah, he is because prior to this, the zombies are just like these shambling,
Mm-hmm.
eating, killing machines, really, with
Fodder.
no
They're fodder.
fodder,
Yeah.
right? But the madness though is like the fact that Logan believes that he's somehow, you know, communicating with this fucking thing. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And it's like you like there are moments when you're like, oh, he actually is communicating with him. You know,
right.
there is like consciousness there, but it's debatable whether or not any of that's even real. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, yeah, some of it is like, okay, wow, I can't believe Bub did that. But in reality, it's not that big a deal. Like,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the things
totally.
he does are based on the memory of the human being. Like he's not, fully verbalizing. He's not fully communicating. He's not eating flesh. He's still a zombie. He's still a monster, but I love that Romero gave him life, quote unquote. He gave him like an attitude, and it's just like a cool character. Bub, like you don't want to see Bub die. Bub does not die. We don't know what happens to Bub, but he lives, and the movie is over. Um, and all of the fucking horrendous military people in this particular film get their just desserts, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I thought it was interesting how they refer to Logan as Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe as a kid I was thinking more like Bub being like the monster. But
Mm-hmm.
as time that analogy doesn't really hold up because like Mary Shelley's book, there's like a the monster hates Frankenstein. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because he did the guy never in the Frankenstein's monster never asked to be brought into the world. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
there's a big conflict between the two. But in this one, I just thought it was interesting how they're trying to play up the sympathy for Bub. But at the end of the day, he's a fucking monster, though.
Oh no, totally. I talked a bit about how much the movie made back then. The issue is that in America, it was a bomb. It made only under 6 million in America for a 3.54 budget. It did very well internationally. It made over $28 million outside of the U.S. So that's how the whole total take was, 34 million. But again, Dawn and Night of the Living Dead made a lot more than that and were better reviewed. It's funny looking at the reviews of this film from back then. Everyone was harping on the acting, overacting, and the acting is not as good and unimpressive. And Roger Ebert is like, there's a lot of overacting in the film. He only gave it like a 1.5 out of 4, and New York Times, didn't give it a good review. But again, like many horror films from the 80s, The Thing and Halloween 3 in particular, this film is looked way more fondly upon now. And people see the things that Mike and I are talking about now, right, Mike? I mean, they
Yeah.
see all these messages and what Romero was trying to convey, which was absolutely lost on people as they're kind of living in the fucking heady, consumerist, American loving 1985,
Yeah, and also there's no humor in this movie at all. It's like a completely dark, bleak film. The humor is, I wouldn't say it's unintentional, but you're
Mm-hmm.
laughing at just the savagery of the situational savagery of the military guys. Like some of the things they say
Yeah,
is kind of funny, but in this kind of gallows way. You know what I mean?
right. And
And
they're racist and they're sexist,
oh yeah,
and it's,
yeah,
it's definitely 80s, quote unquote. It gets a little over the top. For maybe a young person who would see it now, they might be a little shocked by some of the things that come out of the mouths of the actors, but that was 1985. Um, Honestly, a part of me feels like Laurie Cardille is the best actor in the film. Definitely the best character in the film, and the most, you're fucking rooting for her. I think she did a great job. What about you?
Yeah, no, she was definitely probably as far as like acting ability, the best actor in the film, no doubt on
Yeah,
that. You know.
yeah, she had done some stage stuff, and I mean, again, it's like Romero in his earlier films always had this kind of like ragtag group of people that were a mix of, you know, Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania area stage people, or small actors or new actors, or again, there's a little bit of nepotism with Laurie Cardille, but again, she fucking, I think, knocked it out of the park in this. But I don't know, I always feel like that just kind of adds to the charm of these Romero movies, which you don't always hear about. Like I've never really heard much about, like, if Craven had a group like this, or John Carpenter did. I know John Carpenter definitely worked with certain people more than once, but I feel like Romero was almost kind of known for having this like family, quote unquote, of people that he always worked with, which to me is just a cool thing.
Just real quick, Joe Pilato passed away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a great HorrorCon memory of him. One of the first HorrorCons I ever went to was a Fangoria one in Manhattan, and he was there. And I just ever just have a memory that just stays in your head for no reason at all.
Sure.
And this memory is because I went to this one by myself, and Joe Pilato's just outside having a cigarette when I'm leaving. When I'm leaving the con, he's outside. He's by himself. He's smoking a cigarette. I might have gave him a head nod, gave me a head nod, and I just have that memory for the last 20 something years in my head, of Joe Pilato from Day of the Dead. And he seemed like, nice, cool guy. And it's just one of those weird things that just kind of stayed with me, that, like, I remember Joe Pilato outside I think the New Yorker hotel. I can't remember what hotel it was. It was in 98 or 99. And yeah, man, I mean, he always had people fucking wanting his autograph, like, beloved character actor guy.
He has like 5 names too. There's like his
Huh?
also other names included Joseph Plato,
Hmm.
Joe Pilot,
Interesting.
Joey Powell, and then
Uh-huh.
Joseph Rhodes.
Mike, maybe he was avoiding the tax man. Who knows?
I love that, man. I love like when
I like
people
it.
have
I
different
tell you,
names.
the more names you have, I think the more I like you. Let's be, like in the hardcore scene, growing up, kids in the 80s and 90s, there were people with nicknames. You didn't even know their real names. You might have gone your whole time of show going and not even known somebody's real name. You just knew their nickname,
Yeah, yeah.
which is kind of cool, right, Mike?
That is kind of funny. It's kind of cool. You can be anonymous that way.
Yeah. It's like you couldn't pay me to know somebody's name, but I know their nickname, and I know the name that they told me was their name. So yeah, this, again, went on to get a lot more love a little later down the line. It finally comes out on DVD in 1998. I think it was Anchor Bay and VHS in the late 90s. And then it was out of print for a little while. Cut to the later in the O's, Arrow put it out as a 25th anniversary Blu-ray in the UK, but Shout Factory put it out to the masses in 2013, and they've had it on lock ever since, which is a good thing. I think this movie also, its stamp is kind of like, you see it in other places, like I feel like the bunker thing and the military thing, whenever you see that in anything zombie related, it fucking came from this movie, no?
Yeah, it created a lot of tropes that ended up being reused. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what I was trying to get at with with the Last of Us. Like I like not so much directly from this film, but I go back to that first episode, the science guys in the beginning on the show.
Yes.
And I just like,
Yes.
it's like so fucking cool and Romero-esque, and I feel like, Yeah, just having the scientist in here, like they're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Like, I don't know.
Um, on Ministry, track Burning Inside, there is a Day of the Dead sample in that song, apparently, uh, mixed in with the synthesized music, apparently.
Huh.
That's something I did not know till recently. And of course, on the Michael Graves era Misfits, their 1997 debut, American Psycho, there's a song called Day of the Dead. Bub makes an appearance in The Walking Dead, Mike, in season 3 or season 4.
Huh.
I actually remember that. There's a zombie that literally looks exactly like him in season 4, and it's a nod to Day of the Dead. So yeah, in Stranger Things season 3, they're going to sneak into a theater to see Day of the Dead because it's the summer of 1985. Season 3 of Stranger Things. Yeah, man, this movie has definitely left its mark. It's also been sampled by My Life with a Thrill Kill Cult. You know, maybe didn't get a lot of love in its heyday, but as time went on, it is a classic. Would you say?
100%, man. I mean, like I said, this is like one of my most highly regarded zombie movies.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny, man. I don't think I ever saw the 2005 prequel, Day of the Dead 2 Contagion. Did you see that movie?
No, I did not.
No, I never heard a good thing about it. Then in 2008, sure enough, there's a Day of the Dead that went straight to DVD. Didn't see that. And there's there was a TV thing on Sci-Fi. Did you
Oh,
watch that?
I didn't even know that existed actually.
Yes. Well, I don't. Well, it's funny. Wikipedia says that it came out in 2021. Did that happen? I mean, I don't know. Listeners, keep us in check on that one. Apparently, at some point, also in 2021, July 2021, it was announced that Laurie Cardillo, Terry Alexander, and Jarlath Conroy, the 3 heroes, are all going to be in Night of the Living Dead 2.
What?
Which was supposed to have come out in 2022. Who? I don't know. What's fucked up about, I think, a lot of this when it comes to the dawn of the dead shit, I think it's in the hands of a bunch of different owners, and I don't know if whoever George left in his legacy, his estate, like, I feel like it's in a bunch of different hands and a bunch of announcements get thrown around, Mike. And a lot of this shit didn't come to fruition. Some of it did, but some of it is just absolute news to me,
Yeah, I haven't heard of the TV thing. And, it's funny. Every now and then I think about checking out Contagion. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe I'll watch that at some point soon. But
yeah,
because it is a cool idea to know how they ended up in the bunker.
mm-hmm.
I actually, it's funny. I was thinking about Rhodes last night when I was watching this. My impression is that he was not the original commanding officer. You know what I mean? Like obviously there's only like 4 guys left at that point.
Oh, well, no, he wasn't. If you recall, he wasn't. The guy was. There was a guy before him who died, and he was one of the guys that Frankenstein was kept some of his body parts and kept some of his brain.
All right, yeah. So
there was someone
right,
before
so
him.
That's no revelation then, because that.
Yes. Yeah,
but,
there was another guy.
But even that is fascinating, really, when you think about it. It's like he's a guy who probably was never really meant to lead anyone, yet then he finds himself in this leadership position, and it just it's fucking lack of character and insanity and just shit getting crazy. And it makes you think, like, makes you wonder if the original commander, if he had actually been like a real leader, if any of the things would have happened. Like if maybe Logan wouldn't got out of hand,
right?
Maybe they would have been able to kept it together for a while,
Yeah, his name was Major Cooper. And he was one of the, the dead soldiers that Dr. Logan, aka Doc Frankenstein, was kind of keeping the remains around and, to do his experiments with. And I do remember a line in the movie that said that Major Cooper might not have been, a walk in. He was like a walk in the park compared to Rhodes, even though he himself wasn't so. He was a bit of a hard ass, and but he wasn't anything near like Captain Rhodes was.
Yeah,
So
somehow that
there's
slipped
something
by
there.
me, I guess.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
in a way, I guess. But yeah, it's just such an interesting plot element,
I just like how the helicopter plays this interesting role in Dawn and in Day of the Dead, and there's two flyboys, and they both end with a helicopter escape of sorts. This movie ends maybe a bit too abruptly for me with an island scene where it's just the three of them, and it's peaceful, and there are no zombies on the island, and you like to think they at least lived out their last days with some peace, and like who knows what happened to them. That's Romero's style, though. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of like how he likes to end movies, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. There's like a little, well, except for Night of the Living Dead, that was
Oh yeah, that's a bit
that
more of a yeah.
that was a real downer ending to that
Downer,
one.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, totally, obviously. Yeah, that's the bleakest ending of the three, 100%. Night of the Living Dead. Um, but this one, in a way, is the most violent, and it's kind of it's the darkest. And what are you giving Day of the Dead on our scale of 1 to 5?
Oh, clearly this gets a 5 out of 5 for me.
It gets a 5 out of 5 for me. Honestly, look, all three movies to me are 5 out of 5s.
Sure. Yep.
Night, Dawn, and Day. Although I think in my head I change where I rank them, from time to time personally. Like I have a hard time sometimes picking a favorite. Usually the favorite is Dawn, though. As a person, it's like that's might be my personal number one. But I do think all three are super important.
I agree. Like these are the beginning of modern zombie filmmaking, really.
Yeah, and look, man, a lot of people copped from Romero. There's no beating around that bush. Um, but he's a great person to cop from. he laid quite a foundation here. You know what I'm saying? That lives on to this day. I mean, The Last of Us, as different as it is from Walking Dead and the Romero stuff is fucking there. I mean, we've already mentioned it. Um, and how many directors can have that as their legacy? Not many.
No, no, not at all. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Amen.
I wonder what's going to happen on The Last of Us tonight.
I know. I'm excited. um, so yeah, listeners, do you think are we marks? Are we stands for The Last of Us? Do you think? What do you think? I think we are. But yeah, I mean, you know, again, I feel like all this ties into Romero. Even Brian Keene's zombie novels tie into Romero. There's none of this without him, and he's such an important guy. And for fuck's sake, if you have not seen Day of the Dead, you need to see Day of the Dead. Come on, get with the program. So yeah, this was fun, Mike.
Watch all three of these, man. That could be a
Yeah,
nice little evening for yourself.
100%. We're going to be getting into some new stuff, as the year rolls out. Again, it's early in the year, and it's always fun to talk about classics, especially ones that we have just, in the course of our near decade, just not gotten to, right, Mike?
Yeah, I mean we've been covering a lot of new stuff, so it's good to go back and do something a little older.
No, totally. I got to see a really cool trailer today. Stephen King's The Boogeyman film coming
Oh
out.
man, yeah, I got to check that out.
It was a real short trailer that didn't show you the whole movie, but it had a very nice scare in it. So yeah, look out for that trailer online, listeners. I'm sure some of you might have seen it already. I'm excited for that. I remember reading that short story. It's in Night Shift, so I'm stoked for that. Side note, the Boogeyman short story that's in Night Shift, Mike, was originally in the magazine Cavalier, which I believe was a porno magazine. So yeah, there's that.
Actually, that's common, man. That was like a thing.
Super common, yes.
Yeah. That
Among
was
the
like a
early
thing.
King stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And a lot of early horror writers. I mean, look, again, horror for a while was not what it is. You know, it was for the freaks and the geeks and the weirdos. So we have to praise our Kings and our Romeros for getting it out there to the masses.
Do you think they printed horror fiction in Jugs magazine?
You know what? I mean, I probably not Jugs, but it was in certain ones that had more than porn in them. I mean, there was shit in Penthouse and Playboy, and it just back in the 70s, it was just a weird time. You know, no internet, there's no mass market horror fiction, hasn't even happened yet. So it was what it was.
Oh man, I have to look up, guys like Ramsey Campbell and stuff like that. And see if like originally his story appeared in like Jugs magazine gallery or something.
But dude, think
like
about it. Like H.P. Lovecraft and Robert Bloch were in the equivalent of like zines that 10 dudes read. I mean, that's what they were in. They were in like nothing at first. You know,
yeah,
like
no, that's true. Yeah,
it was small potatoes, man. It was it was a bit of a climb, and now we have the horror that we enjoy today. All right, listeners, we will see you next time. Like I said, this one was a lot of fun. I hope it was fun for you. And Mike, we will chat soon.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.